Hello, everybody. Happy Monday to you. Welcome to the first of its kind, the first live edition of the 1212 podcast. My name is Trent. It's great to have you guys here for the first show. The initial plan that I had was I wanted to get right into the Wildcard games, but obviously a little bit of news in the football world just breaking a little bit ago. Doug Peterson has been fired by the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles having a disappointing 4-11-1 season, missing the playoffs in a terrible NFC East with a mostly talented roster that was incredibly ravaged by injury. So, when it comes to the firing itself, the emotional side of things, especially if you are a Philadelphia Eagles fan, was your coach. Doug Peterson will, despite what's happening today, Doug Peterson is going to go down as probably the best coach in Philadelphia Eagles history, simply because he got the Eagles their first Super Bowl. And it's really hard to move on. You saw it in the MLB just last year with the release of Joe Madden from the Chicago Cubs. There's always going to be that sentimental value to that hire. So, when it comes to Super Bowls, Doug Peterson will forever be synonymous with Philadelphia, just as Joe Madden will forever be synonymous with the Chicago Cubs. So, here's the thing about Doug Peterson. I'm not entirely surprised by the firing, simply because of the fact that when he benched Jalen Hurts in Week 17, he had definitely lost the locker room. And when it comes to the NFL, if you lose the locker room, you don't have much of a chance of succeeding after that. You need your players to buy into your culture, and at that point, especially after all of the struggles at quarterback, all of the drama with Carson Wentz, will he play again, won't he play again? And to top it all off, you bench the guy that you benched Carson Wentz for. At that point, how many of your players are going to buy into your culture? And as it shows, at least from the Philadelphia Eagles front office, not many people were buying into that culture. So, will we see Doug Peterson as a head coach in the NFL again? It's hard to say, because as things are coming out now, obviously we'll learn a lot more about what was going on within the Eagles locker room. But when it comes to Doug Peterson coaching again, it's not an impossibility whatsoever. But considering the latest headline was he got tired of people telling him what to do in Philly, man, it's going to be hard seeing a front office who would want to deal with a head coach who would clash with them regularly, which, if there's any merit to that article, which I have not read yet, all I've seen is the headline, I can't say if there's anything true or not about it. But when it comes to that kind of mentality, how many locker rooms are going to be willing to put up with that? So, best of luck to Doug Peterson. Hopefully, now the question becomes how valuable to these new head coaching candidates is the Philadelphia Eagles job. Could you imagine maybe... So for one, I don't think we'll see Carson Wentz as the Eagles quarterback next year. But again, now that comes into question now that they've moved on from Doug Peterson. Are they choosing Carson Wentz over Doug Peterson? But if you're doing that, what happens to Jalen Hurts? It's really hard to say, but regardless, this should be a really interesting offseason for the Eagles. They have a very high draft pick. When it comes to the offense, their offense is still full of weapons. Whether you have Jalen Hurts or Carson Wentz behind center, I don't think that changes the appeal of the job. So, would a top head coaching candidate like, say, offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy be interested in the Philadelphia Eagles job? Who knows? That's going to be really interesting to see, and I can't wait to see what the Eagles do to rebuild what is a mostly talented roster this offseason. So, moving along now, this weekend was Super Wildcard weekend in the NFL. And I'm going to touch on each game. I'm not going to go super in-depth on the games. I just tried to get a general feel for this week, and I'll talk about the games that really stood out to me and the storylines that are kind of coming out from them. So let's get this out of the way first. The least interested game, for me at least, was the New Orleans Saints against the Chicago Bears. The Saints wiped the floor with them. To tell you how interested I was in this game, I want to say that I watched the Nickelodeon broadcast instead of the CBS broadcast, but I didn't. I like Tony Romo as an analyst too much. I stuck to CBS. But I did watch some highlights of the Nickelodeon broadcast of this game. And unique, I think, would be the best word I would use to describe it. It was a very, very unique broadcast. It was interesting. You know, I don't know how it is with this generation of kids. I'm a millennial. I'm not part of Gen Z, if that's the new generation. I think they're all stupid. But that would be, if you want to put me into a group, that's what group I belong to. And, you know, I've been watching the NFL for as long as I can remember. And maybe being in Green Bay, that's just part of the culture. You raise your kids on football. But I don't know if it's changed so much to this point that, you know, kids don't watch football now or don't know the rule of football. Or if they're just trying to get an entirely new audience. But it was really interesting to see. They worked in a lot of clips from Nick's shows. Of course, they had the slime going in the end zone. But really, the Nickelodeon broadcast itself was a lot more interesting than this game. It was never close. You know, the Saints were a far better team than the Chicago Bears. And, you know, part of me feels for Bear fans. But as a Packer fan myself, I'm glad that you guys are miserable, and I hope it stays that way for a very long time for my team's sake. But on the other side of things, because, you know, I'm not a complete sociopath when it comes to NFL fans, the Bears have a lot to figure out this offseason. You know, can you really put all of the blame on Matt Nagy for the struggles that the Bears have had on offense these last 2 years? It's a really interesting question because I had talked about this with one of my friends who's a Bear fan, Parker, and he had mentioned, which was a really good point, the offense for the Chicago Bears really fell off when Mitchell Trubisky was first benched. And from that point on, Nick Foles had taken over, and just the offense for many, many weeks just laid an egg. And so you wonder, and then, you know, a stretch against bad teams with bad defenses, Mitch Trubisky performed very, very well when he had to relieve Nick Foles because of an injury. So the question became, after that, whether or not this was a matter of their schedule or if Mitch Trubisky was really the answer on offense. And unfortunately for Mitch Trubisky, the answer so clearly after this weekend was that the offense is inept and Mitch Trubisky was not the answer. And so you got to wonder if you're the Bears front office. Obviously, it's not a question at all. There is not a more frustrating player to watch than Mitchell Trubisky in the NFL when it comes to the quarterback position. Maybe Mike Glennon. But when it comes to Mitch Trubisky, it is time to move on in Chicago. You know, it's time to acknowledge you made a mistake. You passed up on 2 generational talents, yes, but you have to move on from Mitch Trubisky. And, you know, to rub salt in the wound of Bears fans, because that's just the nice guy that I am. When it comes to your team, because that offense, mind you, is very talented with players like Allen Robinson and David Montgomery. There was no reason for that offense to be as bad as it was. And just to pour salt in the wound, you guys could have had Cam Newton. Can you imagine Cam Newton with that offense versus the offense that he had in New England with virtually 0 weapons? I can only imagine what Cam Newton could do with David Montgomery in the backfield and throwing to a deep threat like Allen Robinson. And the Bears could have had that. And they chose not to. And chose to trade for Nick Foles. And sure enough, it backfired on them. They just, they lost their mojo on offense, if they even had it at any point. They got off to a very lucky 5-0 start. After that, they faced a stretch against actual teams. They started losing, and their identity was really shown. The only reason they made the playoffs this year, which, mind you, that has to be probably the worst case scenario for the Bears this year, was to make the playoffs, because I worry that their front office may not see a need for change, or at least deep change. But you made the playoffs at 8-8. Way to go. All it took was the NFL expanding the playoffs, and you guys made it because Kyler Murray got injured in Week 17. There's a lot that needs to be fixed in Chicago, but where it starts, could it be at the head coaching job? Could it be at the quarterback position? Could it be at both? It's going to be really interesting to see how the Chicago Bears adapt this coming offseason. The Saints move on to round 2. They'll be going up against the Buccaneers and Tom Brady. It's a matchup that, seems written in people's dreams. Drew Brees going up against Tom Brady. And the craziest thing about that matchup is that the year is 2021. Both of these quarterbacks are over 40 years old and still playing the game. That'll be really something to see. Now, when it comes to the Buccaneers, that game was actually very, very exciting to watch. I had a very, very good time watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Washington football team. Taylor Heineke, whichever way you pronounce his last name, boy, that guy was, for a playoff game, and for a backup quarterback, a backup to a backup quarterback, he played out of his mind Saturday night. He did as good a job as you could ask the guy to do. Now, I don't think there's going to be much for him in the future. I don't see him as the answer for Washington at the quarterback position. But I guess the big story before the game was the fact that Alex Smith was hurt. When I saw that, I definitely thought, at first, even with Alex Smith, mind you, I don't think that Washington stood a chance. But Alex Smith's leadership was what convinced me that they even stood a remote chance of keeping the game close. So when Alex Smith was announced unavailable for the game, I really thought that spelt disaster for Washington. I definitely thought that would lead to a blowout. Thankfully, it didn't. We got a really entertaining game. That's all I really had to say on that. But also, Tom Brady played out of his mind as well. If anybody thinks that there's a decline in Tom Brady's play, you're wrong. Yes, there's been stretches of inconsistency, but that's to be expected when you get into a new offensive system, when you're trying to get on board with a lot of new weapons. But man, Tampa Bay definitely scares me, simply because of the deep threats that they have. Anybody should be afraid to go up against a team where your wideouts include Mike Evans and Antonio Brown. They are a very dangerous team. We'll see against the Saints. The Saints are 2-0 against them in the season series this year. And one of the classic sayings in the NFL is, it's very hard to beat a good team twice. It's even harder to beat them 3 times. So, we'll see. I do believe in the Saints. I'll get more into that in my next podcast, but for now, very excited to see that matchup. On the other end of things, still in the NFC, we had the LA Rams taking on the Seattle Seahawks in what was a very ugly game for Seattle in general, not just the offense and the defense, but even Russell Wilson. Just something was off this game. I feel bad for Russell Wilson. I really do, especially on the pick 6 that he threw. That was a design screen pass. The wide receiver missed a block. That should never go for a pick 6, and it did. No quarterback should ever have to worry about throwing that pass. And unfortunately for Russell Wilson, it went for 6 the other way. But the Rams' defense is for real. They're ranked number 1, obviously, for a reason. But I saw no give in that defense, and man, they are fun to watch. I love watching the Rams' defense. Their offense, on the other hand, is anemic. It's surprising how much Jared Goff has regressed. Now, let me say this first. Jared Goff, if there was a tough guy award in the NFL, it goes to Jared Goff. The dude broke his thumb, popped it back into place, and finished out that game. But, he just had surgery on his thumb. I think they were saying 12 days prior to this game, and he still went in there to play. But the odd thing is that even with his thumb injury, they still started his backup, which, can be concerning. Part of me wants to think that, man, they were not, or Jared Goff must have not thought he was ready to play. But even then, a leader, if they are available to play, will play. So this seems more like the Rams choosing to keep Jared Goff out of the game. But really, it's something really concerning when it comes to the Rams QB room. And maybe, just maybe, it's the first sign of things to come when it comes to moving off of Jared Goff for the Rams. Either way, the Rams move on. They're heading to Green Bay next week, and what I'm most excited for in this game, yes, this defense is going to be a huge challenge for Aaron Rodgers. But what I'm more excited about is the one-on-one matchup between Jalen Ramsey and Davante Adams. Jalen Ramsey and Davante Adams, in my opinion, are the two best players at their position, without a doubt. So having the two number ones go up against each other, you have who many describe as one of the best route runners of all time in the NFL, going up against a modern shutdown corner. It's going to be incredibly fun to watch. It is going to be just a great, great game, and I'm very excited for that. Alrighty. Let's move on to a game that held sort of a special place in my heart. The Cleveland Browns got their first playoff win under Baker Mayfield this weekend. Anytime that I watch the Browns, I think about my buddy Reese. He is a dedicated Browns fan over there in Cleveland. Shout out to you, man. I loved watching this game. For what many fans take for granted, this felt like, for the Browns, their Super Bowl. It wasn't at home. That's the big shame. I would have loved Cleveland to host a home playoff game. I'm not sure how strict they are with restrictions over in Cleveland. But, man, if there were fans for this game, I can't imagine how unglued it would have been in Cleveland. But one thing that I think I'm very glad is about to end, hopefully, is the constant criticism of Baker Mayfield not being able to step up and lead his team. Baker Mayfield is clearly a good leader. The difference now is that he has another leader above him that can also galvanize the team with Kevin Stefanski. Man, the Cleveland offense looks awesome. Austin Hooper, David Njoku, Jarvis Landry. In the backfield, you have Nick Chubb dominating people. I really, secretly, am hoping for a Browns win this coming week against the Chiefs. I don't think it's going to happen, but my heart wants me to just believe in this team. But I know if I start to believe in the Browns, I set myself up like every other Browns fan, and I'll be met with disappointment, I think. But it's great to see Baker Mayfield get that monkey off his back and get that first win. The Browns' offense, I will say, just the offense, looks spectacular. Their defense has been ravaged by injuries this year. It's definitely, their secondary in particular is a giant weakness, and I think that's going to be exploited pretty well by Patrick Mahomes this weekend. But to say that I am happy that the Cleveland Browns won would be an understatement. A huge understatement. I've spent my life seeing this team at the bottom of the barrel every single year. So to see them back in the playoffs for the first time since, I believe, 2002, and on top of that, to win their first game back, it's a great story for Cleveland. That city, goes through so much misery. It's about time that they got what they deserved, and they got a playoff win from their football team. It's great to see. On the other hand, the Steelers now have a huge question to answer. For those who are wondering, it's not a surprise that the Steelers season fell apart after that 11-0 start. Now, keep in mind, to win 11 games in a row in the NFL is no easy task, no matter what team you're playing against. But even so, what's very clear in Pittsburgh is that Ben Roethlisberger is becoming a liability. It's really unfortunate. Now, it doesn't take away anything from Ben Roethlisberger. He's a great, great quarterback, or at least he was. But the sad truth is, when it comes to every single quarterback that we've seen, whether it be Brett Favre, whether it be Peyton Manning, whether it be Eli Manning, Father Time catches up to everybody, and it looks like it's caught up to Big Ben. I don't know how, and it doesn't squarely rest on his shoulders. Big Ben needs a running game. Anytime you have an old quarterback, you need a consistent running game. And for the Steelers to wind up so one-dimensional, especially a team with such a physical reputation, a team whose culture and past are built on these tough defenses with a staunch running game, it's unfortunate that he's had to go without a running game this year. It turned a hot team into a team that was one-dimensional. They were easy to figure out, and Cleveland really exploited that. And keep in mind, Mike Tomlin has not had a losing season in his entire career as a head coach. That's incredible. I don't know how you can ever justify moving on from Mike Tomlin. I do know how you justify moving on from Ben Roethlisberger. And that's by drafting his replacement for the future. I don't know how they go about doing that. They have a very late pick in this draft. Maybe they try in the second round like they tried with Mason Rudolph, but we're seeing how that experiment is going. I don't even know if it was the second round. It was the second or third round with Mason Rudolph, but regardless, Mason Rudolph clearly isn't the answer at the future. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Pittsburgh Steelers do this weekend. Well, not this weekend, this off-season. So now, when it comes to the off-season, more so, I don't think any team in the NFL had a better off-season than the Buffalo Bills. I think the Stephon Diggs trade was probably the best transaction of this offseason. And we're really seeing an emergence of Josh Allen as an elite quarterback, thanks in part to that signing. Now that he has a real number one in Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen has been playing incredible. And this weekend was no exception when they beat the they beat the Indianapolis Colts 27-24. And Josh Allen made so many spectacular plays during this game. It was absolutely incredible to see. I don't know what more a head coach could want out of a quarterback than what Josh Allen gives you. Josh Allen is starting to put himself in the conversation with a lot of great quarterbacks. And, man, if I'm a head coach, I am very scared if I have to go up against the Buffalo Bills. They are red hot. They were a Hail Mary away from finishing their season with only 2 losses. They could be the number 1 seed right now if it weren't for a Kyler Murray Hail Mary. That's how good this team is. Josh Allen is a galvanizing leader. More than that, he's a great quarterback. He was incredibly accurate, made a lot of great decisions. I think he only had one pass where he missed a read and nearly got picked off. Thankfully, the defensive back dropped it. But still, the emergence of Josh Allen has been so fun to watch. I can't wait to see the Bills this coming weekend against the other winning team from our last wildcard game, which was the Baltimore Ravens. And man, if this was anything, this was Lamar Jackson putting on an absolute clinic against the Tennessee Titans. Early on, you have to give the Titans credit. Early on in this game, they looked great. They looked like they were completely up to the task of stopping Lamar Jackson. They completely shut down the Ravens offense early. And especially after that horrible interception by Lamar Jackson in the first quarter, it definitely looked like it was over for the Ravens. I definitely thought at that point the Titans would be able to take advantage of the turnover and really run away with this game. But thankfully, the defense stepped up. And on top of that, not only did the defense step up, but Lamar Jackson really stepped up. And he led this team. He really carried the team on his back. There's really no other way to say it. This was Lamar Jackson wanting to win a playoff game. He was 0-2 in the playoffs prior to this, going up against, mind you, two very, very good teams. But this game was definitely personal. And Lamar Jackson put the team on his back and got himself his first win. Especially after the interception where the Ravens defense began to stomp on the logo of the Titans. This was what playoff football is all about. And the Ravens really made a statement. Now they are red hot. They've got to be feeling good. They're on top of the world. They have to go up against the Buffalo Bills, which is going to be, I think, probably the best game of this weekend. I don't see any other game being as physical or as close or as evenly matched as these two teams. I'm going to get more in-depth than that in my next podcast. But, man, the excitement for that game, it's definitely the game this weekend I'm most excited for other than the Packers versus the Rams. And the only reason I'm excited for that game is because I'm a Packers fan. But if you wanted my guess as to what's going to be the best game spectator-wise this weekend, it is definitely going to be the Buffalo Bills against the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson against Josh Allen, two quarterbacks from the same draft. It's going to be great. All right. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to today's podcast. This will be up on YouTube. You can head over to youtube.com/1212podcast. I will be back on Wednesday with a more in-depth preview of the divisional round. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you guys later.